Namaste and welcome to Nepal Conversations. Nepal Conversations is a podcast series where we talk to scholars and researchers about the interesting work on various aspects of Nepali society. This third series of Nepal Conversations will focus on unpacking the status of social science research and teaching in Nepal.
For this episode of Nepal Conversations, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Pratyoush Onta, who is a research director at Martin Chautari, a leading research organization based in Nepal that works on promoting the quality of public dialogue in and about Nepal. Dr. Onta has written extensively about Nepali nationalism, Gurkha history, institutions, area studies, the politics of knowledge production, media, and education. He is the founding editor of the journal Studies in Nepali History and Society, established in 1996, and Media Adhyayan, established in 2006 in Nepali, now renamed Samaj Adhyayan. In this episode, we'll talk about his journey of leading non-university based research in Nepal, the challenges and opportunities of academic publishing, and also about the future of inclusive research collaboration in Nepal. Welcome to Nepal Conversation, Pratyush ji. We know you as someone who has led and made immense contribution to promoting non-university based social science research in Nepal. You've been involved for over 3 decades now. So as a historian yourself, can you give us a bit of historical context of why you felt this was necessary, the non-university based research in Nepal, and what has been your experience so far?
Yeah, I guess we could bring into this conversation two contexts that are important. One is personal, the other one is kind of the national environment. Personal is when I returned to Nepal in late 1995 after having finished most of my PhD. I didn't really have my degree with me yet. That came in 96. But most of my dissertation was written. And when I returned to Nepal, I really didn't know what I was going to do. I mean, there was only one thing that I had already been working on since 94. That was the start of the journal Studies in Nepali History and Society, which has consumed a large part of my life since then. But other than that, I did not know where I would work, what kind of work environment I would have, and what kind of colleagues I might work with. First, I went to look for a job at a research institution in Tribhuvan University. And many of my senior colleagues who used to be associated with that research institution asked me what kind of work I wanted to do. They said that kind of work was best pursued outside of the university. So they didn't encourage me to join the university, and that was that. Once that was clear to me that I was not going to join the university, we had to create a platform through which we could do interesting work, basically taking responsibility from others to make Martin Chautari a larger organization. Now, Chautari was already a discussion hosting kind of a solidarity, but it wasn't anything beyond that. There were just two discussions a month, two seminars a month. But I took over the coordinating job, and then things got added to it. First came the research enterprise, then came publications. Later on, as part of the research, the mentoring of younger researchers also became part of what I do. And then finally, the library became functional and fully open to the public in 2006. But I think there is another national context when we remember that Nepal's oldest university, Tribhuvan University, is only a few years older than myself. And also the other fact that faculty members at that university started doing serious research, I would say around the late 1960s and the early 70s, then it's quite obvious that up until that point, there have been non-university locations from which people had contributed to knowledge production. This is a site that's well recognized in Nepal, and it has a longer history than I would say the university's life, and therefore it's also going to be a site from where people will contribute to research. Now, if our universities, and now we have almost a dozen universities in Nepal and several academies that are publicly supported, if the research function in these institutions were much stronger than what they are today, increasingly the off university, the other sites would become increasingly less important for various reasons. The university research scene is not very robust in Nepal right now. Therefore, the off university sites would still be quite important locations for producing research and supporting research in Nepal.
Thank you so much for sharing your research journey with us. You talked about promoting non-university based research and non-university based research institutions in Nepal. What has been the biggest challenge in creating and running this non-university based research institution in Nepal?
Well, I guess some of the challenges are kind of universal. When you begin to start an institution that really doesn't exist, you have to do virtually every piece of work to build the institution. So, for instance, many people who work at Martin Chautari today, we have to raise our own salaries. Nobody actually goes out and gives us money. So there is no guaranteed funding. We don't have an endowment. Funding has always been a challenge. Second challenge is, so research requires that there is there is a college of people working together on similar topics or ideas, through which you can do collaborative work, or through which, or in that kind of environment, you can do your own work, but always by receiving intellectual and academic support from your colleagues. So building a team that actually is functional in these sorts of ways has always also been a challenge. In Nepal, academic publication scene is rather weak. So if you want to publish in a way in which it is compatible with what are international norms, I emphasize the word norms in the plural, then obviously you have to do that kind of work as well, and train people who are able to do that kind of work in a regular routine fashion. And in Nepal, I think there is an additional challenge, which is, if the institution from which you work is registered legally as a non-governmental organization, Nepal's laws require that you are compliant with a regime that treats non-governmental organizations as entities that do hard development work, delivering vaccines, building schools, building toilets, or building, let's say, water pipes for drinking water, etc. And that regime was never created to actually support institutions that are critical knowledge producing institutions like Martin Chautari. Sometimes this regime makes rules that are really not very helpful for our existence.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing all the work that you've been doing. Martin Chautari has been a source of inspiration for all of us. As you mentioned, research requires working together with different people, and you have been quite active in social science research and created a variety of space for its promotion. How do you see the link between research and teaching in higher education in Nepal? Do you see any opportunities to enhance research and teaching synergy?
I think internationally, I mean globally, research and teaching work in a variety of different ways. There's a popular view in Nepal that in other parts of the world, that everybody who does research also teaches. Now, anybody who's actually paid any attention to research producing institutions throughout the world knows that that is not the case. Many national research ecosystems are designed in different ways. In the US, for instance, where I spent close to 12 years, I think even in these tier one research universities, you always found academics that were in three stages of their career. The older ones nearing retirement and not doing research very actively. The middle-aged ones, sort of doing frantic research, still doing frantic research after they had received their tenures. And the young ones doing even more frantic research to get tenure. So there were almost three cohorts, that were qualitatively different in the way in which the idea of research gets operationalized. Not everybody in research universities teaches, A. B, not everybody in research universities teaches well. So it's a trade-off. Teaching and research is a trade-off everywhere. In Nepal, I think research and teaching can happen in many different ways. I have worked with many colleagues in Martin Chautari who taught part-time in Nepal's universities and colleges. So it's not as if just because they are located in a university, non-university location, it's not as if that they don't teach. For me, research has been a lot bigger priority in my life than teaching. Now, I think the research teaching collaboration or synergy can happen in different ways. One is the same individual involved in teaching and research. I've explained that. But other times, research outputs can be included in teaching. And many of the books and articles that researchers at Chautari have produced over the last 25 plus years, they have found their way into the curricula of institutions like Tribhuvan University. For instance, stuff that I have written myself have been included in the past in both MA level and BA level curricula in different disciplines, including English and sociology, which is quite surprising for me because I think I primarily written stuff in the capacity of a historian of 20th century Nepal. That's one other way. There are some academic reference books produced and published by Martin Chautari have also found their way into curricula in various disciplines. This is another way. Now, uh, it would be a really nice world in which everybody who does research could also teach. But frankly, as I explained, that's not possible in most circumstances. So I think we should still explore better ways to synergize teaching and research in Nepal, both inside the university location and between universities and non-university locations. And I think we need to do further conversations on the topic.
That's really fascinating, Pratyoush. I think we probably also need to think a little bit, kind of expand our thinking about teaching itself, because what sounds like what you're already doing as part of, building collegiality, the network among researchers, it's already part of like teaching.
I think after being invited to talk to both of you, I kind of reflected on this teaching research thing, and I kind of realized that I've spent a large part of my life in the last 20 years teaching people how to write clearly. It's not as if I know everything about how to write clearly or academically, but as a historian who believes in the power of clear narrative, then I think I have worked with people who have had master's degrees or bachelor's degrees in different disciplines, in social sciences also, but also in things like management. They were at a stage in their life when they were struggling to write clearly whatever output that was expected of them from whatever research they were doing. I've spent a large part of my life reading draft after draft of their text and trying to basically inculcate how clear sentences, clear paragraphs, and clear writing actually is a great ability that you need to master if you want to be in the field of research. So I was thinking, I probably spent huge number of years reading other people's texts from draft zero to the published version or the near published version, just cleaning up text and suggesting to them that instead of doing this, why don't you write it this way. So I feel like that's been my contribution as a teacher. It might not be recognized as something that teachers usually do, but it's very important to me, and I've spent, as I said, a large part of my life doing that.
Of course, that's a really, really important and a very critical contribution, Pratyoush. So just wanted to pick on this idea of academic publications. And you mentioned earlier that academic publication scene in Nepal is quite weak, like, for example, compared to the Indian landscape. And since you've been kind of directly involved in academic publications as part of Sinha's studies in Nepali History and Society, and more recently in Samaj Adhyayan, what are these sources of, as you mentioned, the nature of weaknesses in academic publication, both as your experience as a managing editor, but also someone who has been actually doing the editing thing, and perhaps there you can also shed light into some opportunities of academic publishing sector in Nepal.
In '94, when I first got the offer to start editing a journal from Mandala Book Point's Madhav Maharjanji, I actually had no idea how much time and energy was needed to start a journal and then keep it going. It's been almost 28 years since that first conversation, and as you both know, keeping that journal and running it, and making sure that 2 issues are put out every year, has taken a large part of my life. I've only been the managing editor of Sinas and not Samaj Adhyayan, so that's been, it's not been a double burden. For Sinas, I think we were quite clear about what we wanted to do. We wanted to produce a journal from Nepal that could go anywhere in the world and be not looked at as a shoddy publication. We wanted to be rigorous, but we also were quite clear from day one that we wanted this to be an internationally collaborative project. As I said, when I returned to Nepal and started doing this journal, I was the only one based in Nepal, and then there were several others of my founding colleagues were based in North America. Over the years, that set has changed, and currently we have, I have academic editor colleagues who are based in North America, but also in Europe, but also in Japan. Previously, we had a colleague who was based in India. So this has been a collaborative project. Like all journals require a managing editor, and I have by de facto, done that work from day one, and I don't regret it. In the beginning, we had a challenge of convincing both contributors in Nepal and elsewhere that the journal was going to survive, and therefore it was worth for them to send their article to us. As authors, as researchers, we don't want to send our text to a journal which then becomes defunct in 5 years and nobody can find the particular issue in which your article was published. We're also starting in a world, in a way, the pre-web world. So all the founders were trained in the era of print, and I think that signature still influences the way in which we operate it today. Our publisher also is a print publisher, and in a way has not transformed the infrastructure of journal publication to make it attractive in a digital savvy world. Currently, our challenge of running the journal is not finding contributions, because of the fact that we've been around for more than 25 years. Academics, both based in Nepal and in all parts of the world, now know that SINAS is a serious forum to publish their work, and when they do publish their work, it will get noticed and read. So right now, our challenge is not to find articles. In fact, we're quite well set in the pipeline of articles, and we are comfortably in a position in which we don't have to publish shoddy material. That it's not that we had to do that in the past, but in the past we've had to face situations where we've had to publish stuff quickly, just to make sure that there were enough pages in a particular issue. Well, we are now in a position where we have enough stuff to publish for the next 3 years, next 3 issues, and we are slowly churning out one issue at a time. I see that this situation is going to continue, simply because I think the number of academics who do research on Nepal in the social sciences is increasing inside Nepal and outside Nepal. There are many Nepalis, including both of you, who are now based in the academy outside of Nepal and who have to publish. We published an article from Umaji, co-written by Umaji back in 2020. We look forward to doing that with Nimesh at some point. Some people might say that they don't want to publish in journals that doesn't really have a large digital presence. They're entitled to that view. But if they want to publish stuff related to Nepal in a journal which has a reputation for being very rigorous in its peer review, then in a way, I think they would quite be willing to submit articles to SINAS. In terms of Samaj Adhyayan, the story is a little different. It's a Nepali language journal, so obviously the potential pool of contributors is limited to those who can read and write in Nepali. Mostly write analytic Nepali, which is not easy, even for people who are mother tongue Nepali speakers, but who have had their entire graduate education training in English. It's very difficult to churn out text in Nepali. I've done that in the past. In the most recent past, I have not churned out text in Nepali all that much. So it's something that I should work on myself. But as you both would know, having been trained in English and English analytical academic writing throughout graduate school for several years, you cannot just wake up one day and say, okay, I'm going to write an article in Nepali. Although we might have written in Nepali all our lives, it doesn't come easily to us. Running a Nepali journal, we thought initially would be easier. It has turned out to be actually more difficult than running SINAS in the most recent years, because as we've written in a recent editorial in Samaj Adhyayan, those who can write both in English and Nepali would prefer to write in English because A, it would come analytically easier to them, and B, it would also provide them greater visibility in terms of the potential readership. And in those who cannot write in English but would prefer to write in Nepali, it has turned out that they require additional copy editing help, which we might not be able to offer all the time. So these two journals, although they are both part of Nepal studies, they cater to different constituencies. I have worked with two different sets of people. There is slight overlap. Ramesh Parajuli ji and myself are members of both editorial collectives of both Sinas and Samaj Adhyayan, but the rest of the crowd that we work with are not overlapping. In Nepali, I think one of the things we've tried to do, and we've done this with the article co-written by Umaji, which is to translate stuff from English, but translation and making sure that the translation's fidelity to the original English text is good itself is very, very challenging in a country where the infrastructure for translation support is very weak, both intellectually and financially. Although we are thought that sort of running a Nepali language journal might be easier than running an English language journal, it's not turned out to be that case. Now, looking nationwide, I think the number of journals published from Nepal is increasing by the day. There are many, many social science journals that are now available in the online platform Nepzol. Many of them have full text visibility and availability. This is good because even by the law of averages, as the number of articles increases, you will have more and more good stuff. But I think some of the incentives for publishing journals in Nepal are a little warped. People are now being encouraged to publish in journals that are called peer-reviewed journals. And whether or not good peer review actually happens in the journals, I don't know. In some instances, I know that they don't actually have a rigorous peer review system, but they nevertheless declare themselves to be peer review journals on the front page. And this sort of requirement is now also been made part of the regime of how academics will be evaluated for promotions and recruitment in Nepal's universities. So some of these incentives have warped the market in a way that it produces and increases the number of journals without actually contributing to the quality of the journal or the quality of the articles published in the journals. So in many Nepali journals published from Nepal, you would find a lot of variation among articles. Now that's the case for any journal published from anywhere in the world, that in a particular issue you'll find some very strong articles and other articles that are relatively weaker. That's been the nature of publication throughout the world for ages. But in Nepal, the quality variation is very substantial. In some articles, in some journals, some issues of some journals, you'll find 3 very good articles and 3 what I would call relatively not so good, or in Nepali jhure articles. So that variation, I mean, journal editors will have to find ways to cut down on that variation in quality and come up with better quality journals. One thing that's positive to remark is that when I started my career in the early 90s, most of the journal publication and academic research was concentrated in the Kathmandu Valley. That is no longer the case. I mean, you have cities like Pokhara, Biratnagar, and many smaller cities from which academic journals are now being published. Now, this is something that has not been well recognized and discussed, although I pointed this out many times in the past, that this democratization of academic knowledge production is very crucial to the success of Nepali polity as a federal republic. I mean, many of Nepal's ills are, they emanate from the fact that Kathmandu dominates the political, social, intellectual, and financial life of the country. Now, as academic knowledge production can be diversified, that dominance will be challenged, and it'll actually give us a more democratic and hopefully more robust, academic environment. We haven't reached there yet, but it might just be the beginnings of that.
I'm really glad that I published in SINAS, and it has been an excellent platform for circulation and use of research within Nepal. And you're also quite right about the translation issue. It was quite difficult to when the article was translated and sent to, it is more difficult compared to the writing the entire article in English. The translation, it was quite difficult to figure out the right words and which one I prefer and things like that.
I think in translation for Nepali language writers, we have basically found two ways that this can be done. For people who can translate their own stuff from English to Nepali, we encourage them to do that. And that since they are the translator of their own text, they can take liberty in what they want to translate from the original English and what they want to leave out, or what they want to even revise in the process of translation. Now, but in your case, Umaji, I think the translation was done by a third
Yes.
colleague,
Yes.
not you and
No.
not Karen Valentin, our Danish colleague, and so therefore just making sure that the translation is loyal to the English part require a lot of work on, not only on the part of the translator, but also on your part as one of the authors, and on my colleague's part as editor. So it required actually more work than writing the English.
And it actually quite links to the issue of democratization as well as decolonization of academic knowledge that you mentioned earlier, because we tend to use all these concepts and ideas that are available in English and try to use it in Nepali, and that kind of also poses the problems of translation and publishing academic articles in Nepali and other languages other than English as well. So that is also one of the, I think, biggest challenges of being able to think academically in languages other than English. Just to change topic a little bit towards the collaboration that you have been doing. You have also been working and collaborating with both Nepal-based and internationally based researchers, and doing all these rigorous researches with them. What are your thoughts on the general culture and climate of research collaboration in Nepal? What do you think needs to change?
I think this is a very important question. As you mentioned, I spent a large part of my life working with other researchers in Nepal, and occasionally other researchers based outside of Nepal. We need to think about research collaboration in kind of in different registers. Let me start by talking about collaboration needed inside Nepal. As we all know, the dominance of Kathmandu in intellectual and academic life is overwhelming in Nepal. And there are many academics based in Nepal who are trying to do good work, but who happen to be institutionally located outside of Kathmandu. The collaborative possibilities between academics based outside of Kathmandu and those based in Kathmandu have not been fully explored or even discussed exhaustively as of now. We've tried to do that through various ways by encouraging people to participate in Martin Chautari's seminar and present their work there, publish in the journals. But it's been very difficult to convince many academics based in other parts of Nepal to be part of this ride. This is a project that we really need to work on. And to me, this is the most important collaborative challenge. The second collaborative challenge is between academics who are based in Kathmandu. Many years ago, I gave an interview in which I suggested that this collaborative challenge does not happen in Nepal because many academics have egos that are bigger than the size of the Kathmandu Valley. I think academics based in Tribhuvan University, Kathmandu University, other universities in Nepal, other universities in Kathmandu in particular, ought to be working together, intensely, so that the whole frontiers of knowledge can be expanded. Just to give an example that is closer to me and to Maji at this point, I don't see clear examples of how School of Education in Kathmandu University and Tribhuvan faculty members who work in these institutions have worked together. That ought to be happening. They ought to be collaborating in research. I know that some occasional collaborations have taken place, but this should be a matter of everyday research living between them. It doesn't happen. it should, I would say that this kind of collaboration is also needed between academic non-governmental organizations based in Kathmandu. Some of this has happened in a personal capacity, but in an institutional capacity, a lot more needs to happen. Third, I think the challenge between Nepali academics based in Nepal and non-Nepali or Nepali academics based outside of Nepal. Some of this has been happening partly because, I mean, such collaboration has been encouraged by funding agencies, for instance, in the UK, not necessarily so in the US. So, in particularly in the country where both of you are located, there have been many projects coming out of UK universities in which Nepali researchers in their personal capacity and Nepali research institutions in their institutional capacity have been collaborators. And this is certainly good for Nepal. Although some aspects of this collaboration requires, uh, further inquiry in terms of how that collaboration was actually operationalized. In the past, I have been parts of collaborative efforts in which the funding came as a grant to a UK university, and Martin Chautari was their Nepali partner. And it somehow seemed as if the UK-based collaborators expected Nepali colleagues, my Nepali colleagues, to do the dirty, hard groundwork and leave the analytical executions and analysis to them, to those based in the UK. These sorts of collaborative dynamics need to be a lot more equal. And I think there's no reason why these sorts of dynamics need to be colonial or even, colonial in the way in which they operate. I think increasingly, fourth kind of dynamics will become important, which is between Nepali academics like the two of you, who are currently based outside of Nepal, and Nepali academics in Nepal. We have to find better ways to both fund research in Nepal, and to do that, you might have to think of ways in which you can challenge the UK-based funding councils to actually support salary research, salary for research in Nepal, not just for not just cover workshops or trips to Nepal or trips for Nepal-based academics to visit the US, the UK. I mean, in a British academic supported project that I did with Michael Hart when he was at SOAS, was good for for travel between the UK and Nepal, but none of the funding grant paid for actual salary time, which then was not very good for people doing research in Nepal as part of that project. So some of these are collaborative possibilities that we really need to further discuss and explore. The last point, the Nepali academics based outside of Nepal. In the social sciences, this is a rather new phenomenon. We've had natural scientists based in academia in outside of Nepal for a longer time, but in the social sciences, except for economics, it's a new phenomenon. I would say that is not even really 10 to 15 years old, and a lot needs to be thought about in the ways in which collaboration can be done.
Thanks, Pratyoush. I think that's really fascinating, and you also outlined some of the ways we, researchers in diaspora can contribute to the research environment in Nepal. So I think that is it's a perfect kind of segue for our final question. We've almost come towards the end of the conversation. So as you also mentioned earlier that we know there's an increasing number of social scientists of Nepali origin who are currently outside of Nepal, and they're already like Umaji and me, we are already working on issues related to Nepal. We know people who aspire to work on various issues related to Nepal. Some are also returning to Nepal, and they've already returned. We know some colleagues who already returned to Nepal to work on the Nepali academia. So you've been you said over 12 years you were in North America doing your PhD. You went but you went back to Nepal and now we look upon you for inspiration, as someone who really inspire people like us. So if you could end by giving some general professional advice for those who aspiring new generation of social scientists who are already working in Nepal, who want to work in Nepal, or even return to Nepal, what would be your advice? How can we contribute and even perhaps some general advice about how we can, create a career in Nepal.
Um, I think we need to also break this down into smaller bits. Um, as we all know that the number of Nepalis now doing PhDs in universities in Europe, North America, Japan, Australia, and elsewhere has never been as big as it is now. And it is also the case that there have been never as many Nepali academics in European academic institutions and North American academic institutions as now. Not all of them do research on Nepal. So first point is to recognize that many of them should do research on other parts of the world, but contribute that knowledge in the Nepali academic landscape somehow. I would really love to read, very detailed empirical work on the evolutions, social and political and economic, written by a Nepali on China of the last 30 years, or India. And at that point, I would rather really not care whether the academic was based in Nepal or India or China or anywhere in Europe or North America. I would just be interested in reading good stuff. So it should be the case that Nepalis should do research on other parts of the world, and that is best done by locating themselves in other academic infrastructures and locations. For those who want to do research on Nepal, I think they need to really read up stuff on Nepal. I have encountered many young academics, much younger than me, in their mid-20s and late 20s, who are very well trained in their home disciplines, but have not read much on Nepal. It's not their fault. It's not very easy to, if you have all your training in a, let's say, a college in the US and a university in Nepal, in the US, on a discipline like, for instance, rhetoric or sociology, it's not as if that your university will necessarily have a whole, large collection of academic writings on Nepal. So it's not easy. But if they want to build a career doing research on Nepal, even after the PhD, they need to read broadly and widely. And since I can assume that they can read Nepali, they need to read not only stuff written in English, but also in Nepali, and in other languages of Nepal. That's when they will be able to contribute really good stuff, both theoretically informed and empirically rich stuff on Nepal, and enlarge the contributions and conversations that academics are having in Nepal and outside. I've seen another tendency which really disturbs me, which I used to see this in my earlier younger days amongst basic natural scientists, and now I'm seeing this increasingly among younger social scientists, Nepali social scientists based in other locations, assuming that people in Nepal do not know much about research and spending a large part of their public talks and lectures talking down to researchers in Nepal. I think the Nepali research community in Nepal is now quite big, and we at this point don't need normative lectures on how to do research. We would rather invite serious conversations on very detailed conversations on funding research, publishing research, doing collaborations, kind of things that I've talked about previously in this conversation. So people need to wake up to the fact that if they want to have serious collaborative research partnerships, they need to, in a way, slightly reorient themselves, read more, learn from Nepali colleagues in Nepal, read their writings before you call them up to have a chat about research possibilities, and so forth. In some ways, these are the preliminary requirements to be able to contribute, in a substantial way to academic life in Nepal and about Nepal. There is another disturbing tendency among some practitioners, Nepali practitioners in institutions, particularly in the UK, coming to Nepal and doing MOUs with Nepali institutions. As far as I can tell, nothing really productive and academically good has come out of these MOUs, and those MOUs are not really worth the paper in which they are written. We need to have substantial conversations that create possibilities for collaboration. So that's really important. With respect to advice that I can offer, I think people who want to return to Nepal should be quite aware that the research infrastructure here is sometimes not very different from what Brian Hodgson encountered 200 years ago when he was based in the British legation or slash embassy in Nepal at that time. If you want to do good research, you might have to do hands-on building of the academic infrastructure that you need to support that work. If you are open to that challenge, please come back. If you are somebody who thrives not in building institutions from ground zero, or not in working institutions which have various degrees of precarity on a everyday level, then it might not be a very good idea to come back to Nepal and do your work. You can contribute to academic life in Nepal by staying outside, but as engaging with Nepali texts and Nepali scholarship in ways that I've outlined previously. I don't necessarily encourage that everybody needs to come back. Those who need to come back, those who want to come back should come back facing a life in which there'll be many challenges, but also the rewards will be quite fun or satisfying.
Thanks for this. I think that's really fascinating, and thanks for ending on that really positive note. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.